Thank you very much. Thank you to Cheryl. I want to thank you for inviting me here. It's good to be here. Mostly I want to thank you folks for being here. I'd look pretty silly if you would not come and I'm in an empty room. Probably feel like an atheist at his own funeral, all dressed up and nowhere to go. So I'm so glad you're here. And we're going to talk about Social Security. By the way, my background, I worked at Social Security for 12 years, and since then I've been a consultant, writer, speaker around Social Security issues. And I'm so happy to be here to talk to you about Social Security. In fact, I feel kind of funny being up here. Can I jump down with you guys? Well, I better not jump. Who knows what might happen? Okay, let's see if that works. Okay, so we're going to talk about strengthening Social Security for today and especially for tomorrow. Hopefully not weaken it. So what we're going to start with is some time travel. We're going to travel in time back to 1935, and then we're going to travel in time to today, and then we're going to travel in time 25 years in the future. Believe it or not, that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about Social Security's impact on individual workers, on their families, and on the broader economy, focusing on Washington State. We're going to talk about Social Security's financing, how it works in the short term, how it works in the long term, and what about those darned government bonds, right? She's not looking happy, but she's nodding her head. We're going to talk about ways to help Social Security. What can we do as a room of people to help Social Security in the long run? So, with that, let's start that time travel piece. Now imagine for a minute that we're back in 1935 and you have gone to the neighborhood cinema to watch a movie, and of course before the movie, what do they show? Not the cartoon, but the newsreel, right? So you're walking down the aisle and you look up and here's the newsreel that's running at your local theater in 1935.
Today, a hope of many years standing is in large part fulfilled. The civilization of the past 100 years, with its startling industrial changes, has tended more and more to make life insecure. Young people have come to wonder what would be their lot when they came to old age. The man with a job has wondered how long the job would last. This Social Security measure gives at least some protection to 50 million of our citizens who will reap direct benefits through unemployment compensation, through old age pensions, and through increased services for the protection of children and the prevention of ill health. We can never insure 100% of the population against 100% of the hazards and vicissitudes of life, but we have tried to frame a law which will give some measure of protection to the average citizen and to his family against the loss of a job and against poverty-stricken old age. It seems to me that if the Senate and the House of Representatives in this long and arduous session had done nothing more than pass this security bill, Social Security Act, the session would be regarded as historic for all time.
I like to say that when I worked at Social Security, we were kind of taught to stand up and salute when we saw this kind of speech. Let's not go there. My biases will become clear as we go along, and hopefully I can back them up with facts and figures and not just an opinion from years ago working there. I just wanted to ask you, I've got this scratchy old video. Who gives a darn? Really, is there any relevance to what this guy said 76 years ago to what's going on today? I mean, really, there's nothing there for us today, is there? So I just jotted down a few notes, and we'll see if any of it rings a bell to the headlines we're getting every day these days. And I really feel for our legislators. It's a tough year. First of all, have we seen any startling industrial changes? Automation, offshoring, that kind of thing. Have some of these industrial changes made life insecure? rather than more secure? Huh. Maybe there is a little relevance there. Are young people coming to wonder what will be their lot when they come to old age? Old people are wondering that too. Do you know anybody who's wondering how long the job will last? It's facing a possible layoff, whether you're a public employee or a private employee, right? Let's talk about what he said about Social Security. Did he promise 100% protection against everything that could happen? No. He offered, quote, at least some protection against the hazards and vicissitudes of life. I love that. What happened to our old language like that? And who did he promise it to? Who is he saying these benefits will go to? I heard him say, to the average citizen and to his or her family. To the average citizen. We're talking about the middle class. We're talking about middle class workers. That's who he's talking about. And what's he promising? Is he promising rose gardens and I was going to say a chicken in every pot. Actually, I don't know whether that was before or after. He promised some protection against the loss of a job and poverty-stricken old age. So that's what they were talking about in 1935. And I guess, is this just an old dead thing that we don't really care about? Or I'm going to ask you to respond. Do you find relevance in what FDR said in that speech? You can vote 1 for yes, 2 for no, 3 for, well, maybe a little bit. And you can go ahead and vote now. The polls are open. Oh, well, you already did. Already got 80 votes in. Okay, let's see how the votes are running. 84% say yes, 15% more say somewhat, so only 1% of the room were saying no, that's really not relevant today. Pretty amazing vote, almost unanimous, that what Social Security was promising 76 years ago still is effective today, still has relevance today. Let's move on. Let's talk about, got one more question for you. We're talking about building a better life today, and to me, that partly that is your financial life. Would you say that your financial security would at least include Social Security? Not necessarily be dependent on Social Security, but is Social Security part of your financial picture these days? 1 for yes, 2 for no. Most of you have already voted. Let's see how the votes are running. 99%. Compared to other towns we've been to, I've seen 95%, but 99%. That's pretty amazing. So again, I think Social Security does have relevance to each of us in our lives, even if you're not retirement age yet, like myself and some other people in the room. I think it's extremely important to know about Social Security and see if it's sound, make sure it is sound. So let's talk about it in a nutshell. In a nutshell, we're talking about an insurance program. How do I pay my premiums on Social Security? You simply work, pay your taxes, payroll taxes, pay for Social Security. And then, if certain things happen, they'll pay you back with insurance payments. Very similar to car insurance or house insurance. Notice that it's paid for by, gentleman said, payroll taxes. It's paid for by workers. Only workers pay into it with a matching from their employer. And only workers and their immediate families can draw anything out. If somebody did not work and pay in, nothing gets paid back. Just as if I don't pay my car insurance premium, I can't file a claim for car insurance. This works exactly the same way. Well, not exactly, but similar. What does it insure against? Loss of work income. That's its job. Based on 3 different events: retirement or age, disability, or death. If any of those 3 things happen and somebody has paid in, then the family and the individual can draw back out. That's what Social Security is all about in a nutshell. I'm going to talk about how Social Security works for the individual worker. First of all, it's an earned right. You've got to pay in or nobody gets anything back out. You have to earn it. It's not a gift, it's not charity, it's not alms, it's an earned right. You have earned your Social Security. Now this one I may have to change. For my entire life, Social Security has been the only part of retirement financing that was rock solid. We've seen what happened to pensions. We've seen what happened to savings. You ever hear of the three-legged stool, Social Security, pensions, and savings? The other two legs have kind of crumbled. Social Security is the only one that's still standing. I was going to try to stand on one leg, but maybe I better not. Still standing. And now there's some question about whether it would continue to be strong. So that's an issue. Maybe I'll have to change this slide. We'll see. On the other hand, I would still say that it's more solid than any of the other supports for retirement financing. We've seen pensions fail. We've seen savings fail. But Social Security's hanging in there. This is kind of cool. A lot of people overlook the fact that for younger people, you guys, I'm talking to you, for younger people, Social Security is there in case something happens to your work life mid-career, like disability or death. If those things happen, Social Security starts paying you and or your family. Pretty cool. Now this is kind of a flip side. Social Security is the only program I know, now you're going to throw things at me in a second, the only program I know of that has a cost of living adjustment exactly equal to the inflation rate every single year, right? Maybe, okay. Let me give you the plus side, then we'll talk about the negative side. The plus side is that if you live in retirement for 20 or 30 or 35 years, like many people are doing these days, normally inflation would little by little eat you alive. For example, if you had a fixed pension, it looks smaller every year. Social Security has that cost of living adjustment in there, so it's kind of like protection against long life. You can't outlive your Social Security. Pretty cool. The bad side is, as you know, the last 2 years there have been no cost of living adjustments. Why? Were they just being stingy? They just shut off the tap? Some people are saying yes already. They measure inflation the way most of the government does, which is the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, and it did not go up the last 2 years, so there was no raise in the Social Security. Every time I go to the gas pump, I think we're going to get a raise in January. We'll see. I think inflation, I think I heard last week it's something like 2 or 3% so far for the year. Any economist in the room can correct that number? I think it was 2.8 or something so far, and we still have till October to measure inflation. So watch for maybe a small raise in January, but the last 2 years there hasn't been one. But the one before that was 5.8%, which is more than I got at work, so I know. Enough of the silver lining business, right? This is key. And you know what? I didn't really think of this until I prepared these slides a couple months ago. You take your typical worker, working hard, putting in the hours. What do they have for retirement? Do they have a pension plan? Most don't. I think we're down to 15% of employees have a pension plan. Do they have a 401k plan to replace the old pension plan? Most don't. For most, over 50% of workers, there is no retirement plan whatsoever, pension or 401k or 457 or anything else. There is no retirement plan at work except for one. What's that? Social Security is their only retirement plan, unless they do it on their own with an IRA or something like that, which they should be doing. Next, what about life insurance? Is a typical worker protected by life insurance at work? What about disability insurance? For most workers, Social Security is all they have. They don't have any pension or other insurance. That's it. We're talking about something that touches virtually every single worker in the country, 95% of workers. And if you changed it, you'd be changing it for every worker out there. It's pretty amazing. Incredibly broad program, and incredibly important to this guy we're looking at, or gal that we're looking at, the individual worker. What about their family? Well, if something happens to the worker, so the income stream stops, the income stream will continue from Social Security. For a spouse, a child, a former spouse. By the way, A few years ago, we used to call spouses and their like the significant other, right? I like to call former spouses the insignificant other. If somebody passes away, they'll pay a widow or a widower. And even in some cases, they'll pay parents if they're dependent on that worker. That's pretty amazing. So it's not, there's family values built right into the program. And this has been the case ever since the 1930s. They always wanted to look not just at the worker, but at those who are dependent on the worker, the immediate family. Also, let's look at how this impacts households. Right here in Washington State, about half of the households that get Social Security is more than half of their income. If you're on Social Security, it's a big part of your household income. It's easy to remember these stats. For half of workers, it's half their income or more. But this one's even scarier. For about 1 in 5 Washington Social Security recipients, that's pretty much all they have. Ooh, I see a vigorous nod back there. 90% of their income or more, 100%, comes from Social Security. It's all they have. So if you start messing with the Social Security, you're messing with people's livelihoods. Pretty critical. In fact, if you looked at all 65 and overs in the whole country, and you said, what's the biggest sources of income for these people? We'd have to count things like work, savings, pensions, and Social Security. Social Security is the biggest by far. If you took all of those sources of income, Social Security is the biggest source of income for 65 and overs. It's huge. Again, you'd be messing with the livelihoods of people if you change Social Security. I've never said it that way. I have to work on that. Let's talk about the economy. Here in Washington State, Social Security is paying about 1 million recipients every month. That's 1 in 7 Washingtonians. Look around your table. There's about 7 of you at the table. At least one of you is on Social Security. I've never said that either, but it seemed appropriate. That's pumping into Washington State $1.2 billion per month. You cut that by 10%, you're impacting the entire Washington State economy. Huge impact. Now check out the average payment there, about $1,100 a month. Is anybody getting rich on this stuff? We're talking about a very small income. And yet it's half of the household income for the average retiree. So maybe if you look at a program that spends $600 billion a year, you think, wow, there's some real savings to be had there. But when you look at an average check of $1,100 a month, how are you going to cut that and not have direct impact on that individual and on every business that individual goes to? From the grocery store to the hardware store, you name it, that's going to affect the community if you cut that income. Because that money just gets pumped right back into the economy. I've never said that either. I'm way out on a limb here today, you guys. So, pretty big impact on Washington State's economy. And these numbers, by the way, kind of mirror the national numbers as well. Now, let's talk about the funding a little bit. This is kind of cool because it's one of those rare government programs that's self-funded. It has its own income sources. Very cool. It doesn't have to ask Uncle Sam for money. And it hasn't since 1983. So it's funded separately from the federal operating budget. It's got its own income sources. Pretty cool. It actually has 3 income streams, and everybody overlooks the other 2. First of all, of course, there's payroll taxes. That provides 82% of Social Security's money. What's that interest on trust funds? What is that? We better talk about the trust funds. We already have at least one angry person back in the corner. Social Security's financing is based on trust funds that can only invest in one kind of investment. What is that? Government bonds is all they can buy. And that sounds like that's it. Now you called them IOUs. Is it true the trust funds are full of nothing but IOUs? Yeah, any bond is an IOU. Whoops. Oh my, that'll drive you crazy. Sorry about that. Any bond is an IOU, including Treasury bonds that Social Security buys. So yes, the trust fund is full of IOUs. Your question was specifically, when will they pay that back? They're constantly paying it back, every quarter. Social Security gains not 15% interest, I wish. 15% of their budget comes from the interest on their bonds. These have been continuously paid back ever since 1937 when taxes started to be collected. So it's not like the money's gone or something like that. It's continuously paid back by the government. And I know you're looking so skeptical that I'm going to say one more thing. Let me guess that your skeptical point is, didn't they take all that cash and spend it? Didn't they steal all the money out of the trust fund and spend it? Yeah, that's normal. That's totally normal with any bond you buy. If I go down to Pasco City Hall or Kennewick or Richland and buy a city bond, a municipal bond, what are they going to do with the money? They're going to spend it on city projects, right? Roads, schools, something like that. And as long as they pay me back, I'm fine with that. I know they're going to do that. If I go to Boeing and buy a Boeing bond, what are they going to do with my cash? They're going to use it for their operations and pay me interest and principal back. Now, if I go down to Whoops and buy a Whoops bond, oh, let's not go there. So it could, we don't want federal bonds to turn into a Whoops. I just thought of that while I was sitting over here. We don't want federal bonds to be a Whoops. We don't want to default on that. It would ruin Social Security. It would destroy the banking system, the insurance system. Our entire financial system is based on these government bonds. So they are paying it back. They always have since 1937. And that's the interest income coming into Social Security, which is a big piece of their budget. And some of you are lucky enough to pay income taxes on your Social Security if you're a higher income retiree. Good for you. And that money that you pay to IRS goes right back into Social Security as well. Excuse me. Nobody's throwing anything yet. Okay. So the bonds are normal bonds. Well, there's one special thing about them. They're called special issue. They can be turned in at any time for cash. Anytime Social Security needs cash, they just turn in one of their bonds. That's going to work great as long as Uncle Sam has cash to give them. The entire system has been built on government bonds, and if something happens to government bonds, something's going to happen to your Social Security. So all of a sudden, I'm not an activist, but all of a sudden I'm feeling like an activist around this debt ceiling talk. So there's no crisis. Social Security is not in crisis. It's one program we can say is not in crisis. Now, how can I stand up here and say that to you? Because they've been running a surplus ever since 1984. Last year, they ran a $69 billion surplus. Wait a minute. You saw the articles in the paper that said that last year they went into deficit and they're going to be in permanent deficit from now on, right? You're supposed to say, right. If you look at the fine print, they're only looking at the payroll tax income going into Social Security. They're ignoring the bond interest. This would be like if I looked at your personal finances and I said, oh, but I don't want to hear about anything you're getting from your investments. We're not allowed to look at that. We can only look at your regular monthly income. That doesn't seem right. So yes, it went into deficit relative to payroll taxes last year, and it will continue to be so, which is a little scary because that wasn't supposed to happen until like 2017. So it happened real early because of this endless recession we seem to be in. But they're still running a surplus if you count the other sources of income into the trust fund. $69 billion last year, about the same this year. Pretty good. Should be in surplus until 2024. Then it'll start running a deficit. Boy, we got $2.6 trillion saved up right now, all in government bonds. Pretty big wad of money. 2.6 trillion bucks earning interest. By the way, we talked about bonds being an IOU. I've heard it so many times. There's nothing in the trust fund but worthless IOUs. If any of you think your government bonds are worthless IOUs, I'd be happy to take them off your hands. Just sign them over to me. It's spelled L-A-N-D-I-S. That'd be great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. If you project out how long will this money last between the tax money and the money in the bank, if you will, we have all the money we need to run Social Security at this level to 2036 with no changes whatsoever. That is 2.5 decades from now. I'm trying to think of one other entity on the planet that I could say that of. Can you say that about big corporations? They have all the money they need to run for 25 more years. Can you say it about other governments, city governments, state governments, California? You can't. This is one of the strongest financial statements on the planet, and yet we're being told it's a crisis. They've stolen all the money. It's not true, but that's what we're hearing. If you mapped out the trust fund reserves, I start this chart in 1983. Why? Because that was the last time Social Security almost went broke. They got within 2 months of default on Social Security in 1983. I was working there then. We all thought we'd get kicked out of the office. We didn't. In 1983, Congress acted, raised taxes, and cut benefits. Kind of a balance between the two, raising taxes and cutting benefits. And they said at that time, with the surpluses we create today, we think we have about 50 years of solvency on Social Security. That would take it to 2033, if I'm doing the math right about where we think it's going now. This same chart has been around for the last 30 years, roughly. So it peaks out at 2024 and then quickly crashes. We got no money left in 2036. I'm going to ask you, what then? What happens after 2036? If the trust fund is spent, is Social Security done and gone? Is that the end of Social Security? Vote 1. If you think maybe they can scrape together 25%, 50%, 75, or 100% of benefits, vote 2, 3, 4, or 5 based on that chart there. So 1 if you think that's the end of the road, higher numbers if you think they will have some money. Votes coming in a little slower this time. This can be a poser. Okay, let's see how the votes are running. Let's see, 16% say that's the end of Social Security. Most common vote is they can pay 75% of benefits. Next most common vote is 50% of benefits. Let's see what the experts who are actuaries say. They say we have 75% of the money still coming in after 2036. Where's that coming from? Not from interest, because the bonds are all spent. That's just coming from current workers, like our kids and grandkids, paying their payroll taxes. That by itself would fund Social Security at the 75% level indefinitely. Call it the rest of the century. I don't know. That sounds like a glass 3/4 full to me. And if we could find that last quarter, we could even continue Social Security at this level. So, that's not so bad. It's certainly not a crisis. We got to do something between now and then, but it's not like Social Security is going to crash and burn in the next few years. It's in very good shape in the short run. We got an issue long run. By the way, people that come up with these numbers are actuaries. You know what an actuary is, don't you? A friend of mine told me, who's an actuary friend told me an actuary is an accountant who failed the personality exam. Pretty cool. So anyway, they're the ones that do these projections, and they've proved to be pretty accurate over the last 25 years. They're right pretty much on the ball. So what we got to do is figure out a way to save Social Security, to strengthen it for our kids and grandkids. Really, probably most of us in the room are in pretty good shape with Social Security. We got to figure out a way to make it last for our kids and grandkids. I'll come to your question in a second because I'm almost done. Now, if this were my household, I'd only have 2 choices. I got to cut costs or bring in more money. And in Social Security land, that means you got to cut benefits or raise taxes, which they've done many times in the past, most recently in 1983. So, I'm going to give you some hard choices. Let's say that you had to come up with ways to cut Social Security costs. In other words, cut benefits. What would be your least unfavorite way to cut Social Security costs? Would you, 1, raise the full retirement age? It's currently 66, it's phasing to 67. Would you raise that further? Would you raise early retirement age? Currently 62, and it's been there since the 1950s. Would you raise early retirement age to say 63, 64? Would you just give everybody an across-the-board cut? For example, if you just cut benefits 25%, the system would balance forever. It's a pretty radical surgery, but it could be done. Would you target cuts on, say, wealthier retirees or maybe family benefits like spouses and children? So you get to vote on those. I see some thoughtful expressions. I see some squinting. Oh, now the votes are really in. Let's see, I'm really curious about this one. What would you do to Social Security? Wow. Poor Bill Gates. That's so sad. Looks like the most popular, or should I say least unpopular cut would be targeting cuts on wealthier retirees. Second most popular would be raising the early retirement age. I've seen that with other groups and it kind of surprised me. And looks like the next one up would be raising the full retirement age. By the way, I know I've only given you limited choices, but all of these are leading choices among people who say we have to save money on Social Security. These are some of the leaders in what's being proposed. Thank you so much, because I was curious about how you'd vote. Now we're going to sock it to the workers. How would you increase revenue for Social Security? Would you increase the payroll tax rate? It's currently 6.2%. It was raised 0.8%, almost a full percent, back in 1983. Would you increase the earnings ceiling? Currently 106,000 and change. What that means is only the first 106,000 of earnings gets taxed for Social Security. If I earn 250,000 this year, if I earn 250,000, then I only pay Social Security taxes on the first 106, and that would be used in my Social Security computation. Should we cover state and local workers? Earlier I said that 95% of workers are under Social Security. 5% are under city pension plans, city and state pension plans. For example, state of California, certain municipalities in Washington state are outside the Social Security system. If we brought them in, it would bring in some money to save Social Security. Or should we hit wealthier retirees with more income tax on their benefits? I'm really curious how you'll vote on this one. Let's see, the votes are already coming in. Now they're rushing in. Interesting. Now they've sort of slowed down. Let's see how the votes are running very quickly. And I don't know how you'll vote on this. Earnings ceiling. Took number one position. More than half of you think that would be your first choice for increasing revenue. You know, I've been doing talks like this since the early 1990s, and that has consistently, among workers and retirees, been the first choice. Raise that earnings ceiling. There's a lot of woo-woo stuff behind that, but let's leave that. Looks like kind of a tie between bring in the state and local workers and increase the payroll tax rate. It's a lot easier to raise the payroll tax if you're not on somebody's payroll, huh? Sure, raise it. What the heck? Thank you. That's really interesting. There's only one problem with these polls. I'll tell you in a second. I think that over the years, Social Security has been good to us. We paid into it. We expect it to pay us back. I'm not quite there. I just turned 60, knock on wood. So I'm planning on it being there. It has to be there. I mean, I need it for my retirement. So is there some way we can return the favor? Well, you just expressed to me what your choices would be around these gnarly issues of what do we do about Social Security financing. But you know what? I can't do anything about it. All I can do is educate you on how Social Security works. So what you might do is express yourself to your congressional representatives. And AARP has given you an easy way to do that. Right here in my kit, I found this handout with red writing all over it, just like on the screen. That's in your packet, and it gives you a phone number. And if you call that phone number, it hooks you up very easily to your 2 senators and your congressional rep. And you could express yourself instead of just being silent or perhaps stewing like I often do. You could actually express yourself. And I finally got around to doing this just this week, and it felt good to at least have a voice. So I suggest that you do that. On the other hand, if you're more interested in just learning more about how Social Security works, there's a handout on the back table called Keeping It Strong that's put out by AARP. And I found another really cool thing about the facts behind Social Security, which I apparently dropped behind. It's just the top 25 questions and answers about Social Security. I believe it's in your packet. Very cool. So, with that, to wrap it up, I would say Social Security is absolutely vital to the individual worker, to their families, and to our economy. I would say Social Security is not in crisis in the sense that we've got to do something immediately to save Social Security. I would say in the long run it needs strengthening. It's a really good program and it's very efficient. So it would be good to strengthen it, keep it alive for the next generation. And it could definitely use our help. I think congressional representatives need our voice so they know which direction to steer. So that's my presentation. What I'd like to do now is open it up, if we have a few minutes, for questions. Just a couple minutes?